Study Section 13, Expectations and Financial Markets. Introduction. When we studied the financial sector in Chapter 4, we focused on just two assets, money and bond. Our objective then was to examine the relationship between money and other assets. Thus, we assumed that bond is the only other financial asset. We pointed out then that bond was the only asset just to keep the analysis simple. In this chapter, we will deal with financial instruments such as bonds, stocks, shares, etc. We do this not only to show that there are other financial instruments apart from bond, but also to examine the role played by bond and stock prices in the goods and financial market. Attached to bond holding. If you purchase a bond, the issuer is not liable to pay back the full amount of the bond at maturity. Thus, the bondholder faces the risk of not recovering the full amount of bond. This type of risk is called the bond's default risk. Bonds have different default risk. Bond maturity. A typical bond has a time of maturity. When you purchase a bond, it takes time, say 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, and so on before it matures when it is redeemable. The length of time a bond will take before it is redeemed, matured, is called the maturity of the bond. Bonds have different maturity dates. Bond price, bond yield, and the yield curve. Bond has a price and interest says I. The interest rate on bond is called the bond's yield to maturity. Bond's yield to maturity changes with maturity. The relationship between bond yields and maturity is called the yield curve. Yield curve can be steep or flat. To have an understanding about the shape of the curve, we need to understand the relationship between the prices of bonds of different maturities and the relationship between yields of bonds of different maturities. The present value of bond prices. Assuming that we have two bonds, the first one is to mature in a year's time and it will worth 100 naira. The second one will mature in 2 years' time and it will worth 100 naira. How will their prices determine today? We will make use of the present value formula to work this out. Let the prices of the bonds be P1 and P2 respectively. If the interest rate is R, then the price of the first bond will be, that is, the price of the first bond increases with decrease in interest rate. Note that if we know the price of the bond, we can easily calculate the interest rate, or if we know the interest rate, we can calculate the price of the bond if a bond has a year maturity and if the interest rate is quoted on yearly basis. In the case of 2 years bond, its price will be the present value of its 2-year value, which is 100 naira, and it is calculated as follows. If a bond has a 2-year maturity date, its price will depend on current year's interest rate and the expected interest rate next year. Again, the higher the current interest rate or the expected interest rate, the lower the price of bond. It follows from our calculation that the bond yield to maturity of an n year is the constant interest rate that ensures the price today of a bond is the present value of future payment on the bond. For instance, the price of a 2-year bond with interest rate R that worth 100 naira will be, if the bond price is 90 naira, then holding the bond for 2 years yields 5.4% per year. That is, how can we relate a 2-year bond that has constant interest rate with the one with expected interest rate? Just relate equation 13.3 to equation 13.2. That is, the yield curve and economic activity. Why do financial markets expect short-term interest rates to increase in the future? Under what conditions should the yield curve be steep? The simple answer is that when the economy is recovering from recession, interest rate is expected to rise and so bond yield will be upward sloping. When the economy is going into recession, interest rate falls and the yield curve will be negatively sloped. To see how, we first assume that expected interest rate is zero so that we have constant interest rate. Let the economy commence from equilibrium at point A in the ISLM curve, figure 13.1. Now, assuming that the economy experienced recession, this will shift the IS curve backwards so that the economy settles at point B and output will fall from Y0 to Y1, while interest rate will fall from R0 to R1. As we have said earlier, both fiscal and monetary policy instruments can be used to help the economy out of recession. The expansionary monetary policy shifts the LM curve from LM0 to LM1 and interest rate falls further from R1 to R2 while the economy recovers from Y1 to Y2 even though it has not recovered fully. The financial sector expects the booming period to continue, but they also expect the monetary authorities to control the pace of the boom so that the expansion will not cause economic overheating. This expectation about continuous booming shifts the IS curve outwards and to the right while the monetary policy to control the booming pace leads to leftward shift of the LM curve. In both cases, interest rate rises. More formally, when the economy is recovering from recession, the financial market expects short-term interest rate to rise. Thus, the financial market assumes that there is a positive relationship between interest rate and time and this explains why yield curve is upward sloping. However, empirical evidence in the advanced countries such as the US and Japan departed from this proposition because it was discovered that in 1991, when the US economy was recovering, interest rate did not increase. However, it did increase as from 1994 and this resulted in a flatter yield curve. Stock market and stock prices. Thus far, we have been discussing about bond as the only financial instrument. This instrument is primarily used by the government. In the case of firms, there are many financial instruments such as debt and equity. Debt is in form of loan from banks or corporate bonds. Equity is in form of shares or stocks. Unlike bonds that pays predetermined amount, Returns on stock depends on firm's decision, and the return is called dividends. Dividends are part of firm's net profit. Recall that net profits are divided into two. The first part is retained, plowed back in the firm in form of investment. The second part is paid as dividends. Usually, dividends increases when profit increases and falls when profit plummets. To understand the relationship between stock market behavior and stock prices, we need to examine the movement in stock prices. The movement in stock prices can be measured by using an average stock price index of quoted firms. Different countries use different names for the stock price index. For example, the US uses the S&P Standard & Poor Index and the Dow Jones Industrial Index (DJII). In Japan, Nikkei Index is used as the average stock price, and in the UK, there is the FT. In France, we have the CAC Index, while in Nigeria, we have the All Share Price Index (ASPI). The behavior of stock prices can be informed by the behavior of the economic environment and macroeconomic policies. But how do stock prices change due to changes in economic situation? To answer this question, we need to understand how to calculate stock price in the first place. To do this, we compute the present value of the expected dividends of the stock, assuming that the price of stock is PT⁻S, while the dividend is VT this year. The expected dividends next year and next 2 years will be and respectively. Now, if you buy a share stock today, say GTB share, after the company has paid dividends in the already purchased dividends, it means that the payment of dividends on the share you purchased will commence from next year. What are the implications of the nominal and real stock prices? The first implication is that higher expected dividends will lead to higher stock price. Second, higher current and expected 1-year interest rate will lead to decrease in shares price. Third, higher inflation will lead to lower stock price. The stock market and the economy. The behavior of stock market is not stable, and in fact, it is unpredictable. Why? Because the players in the stock market tend to form expectations about the stock prices based on the economic conditions. This expectation may be right or wrong. However, expectation in the stock market, just like in any other market, tends to dictate the behavior of the stock prices. For example, assuming that the price of GDP share you hold is expected to increase by 25% over the next 3 years, all things being equal, you will not sell your GTB shares now because you will like to enjoy the 25% share price increase. Now, assuming that GTB and other quoted companies' shares are to increase in future by 25%, in that all shareholders will not sell their shares. In fact, they will be willing to buy more. Those who do not have will like to purchase. This will lead to increase in the demand for share. When the demand increases, price will also increase. Now, note that the increase in the demand occurred this year in order to earn more returns next year. As agents divert more money from other assets to purchase stock, the price will be falling and interest rate will be rising. As the demand for shares increases, interest rate falls, and so less of it will be bought at each round. This process will continue in all financial assets until the expected returns on stock is the same as the expected returns on other assets. Thus, expectation in the stock market plays a major role in the movement of stock price. Unfortunately, the experts in the stock market tend to get the expectation wrong most times, indicating that stock price cannot be rightly predicted using this approach because the prediction is based on mere news which may not come true. The best practice is to think of what will happen to the stock price if there is demand shock through government fiscal policy or monetary policy, or supply shock through technological discovery, or external shock such as world oil price. Let us examine how each of these shocks can be useful for stock price prediction. When interest rate increases, what happens to stock price? It falls, and when it falls, less of it will be bought. Thus, it is not true that expansionary fiscal policy will guarantee increase in the demand for stock. It in fact will generate two opposing effects. The first effect is the increase in output leading to increase in profit and hence increase in demand for stock. The second effect is the increase in interest rate that will lead to low stock price and hence low demand for stock. Which of the two dominate? The slope of the LM curve will provide an answer. The slope of the LM curve gives the speed with which interest rate and output responds to fiscal policy. If the LM curve is steep, then there will be a large increase in interest rate and a small increase in output following expansionary fiscal policy. If the LM curve is flatter, there will be a slight increase in interest rate and a large increase in output following expansionary fiscal stance. Part B of section 13. Now, we can say something about the behavior of stock price when there is demand shock coming from government action. When there is fiscal expansion and the LM curve is steep, there will be large increase in interest rate and small increase in output. Large increase in interest rate will cause large decrease in stock price. Small increase in output will lead to small profit and hence small dividends. Thus, if the LM curve is steep, interest rate effect will dominate and it is the case that stock price will fall following fiscal expansion. If the LM curve is flatter, there will be large output increase and hence large profit, large dividends and large increase in demand for stock. Interest rate will increase slightly and hence reduces demand for stock slightly, thus output profit will dominate because the large demand following large output increase will outweigh the slight decrease in demand. Hence, if LM curve is flatter, output dividend effect will dominate and it is the case that stock price will increase following fiscal expansion. This simple analysis tells us that it is not in all cases that stock prices increase or fall when there is fiscal expansion. Whether it will rise or fall depends importantly on fundamental economic reaction that follows, the responsiveness of interest rate or output, monetary policy and stock price. Now, let us assume that instead of using fiscal policy to end recession, monetary policy is used. The monetary expansion will lead to downward shift of the LM curve, producing two effects. Interest rate will fall, output will rise, decrease in interest rate will lead to increase in stock price. Increase in output will lead to increase in profit and hence increase in dividends. Both effects will lead to increase in stock price irrespective of the nature of the LM curve. Thus, the responsiveness of stock prices to monetary policy is relatively predictable. Anytime the monetary authorities embark on expansion, we expect dividends and hence stock price to rise. When they embark on monetary contraction, we expect dividends and hence stock price to fall. The reaction of stock price to policy mix. Apart from the reaction of economic fundamentals to fiscal stance, the monetary authorities may and do intervene if they consider the pace of economy to be so high that it can cause overheating. When the economy is booming due to government support, monetary authorities do react by countering the expansion so as to prevent the economy from possible inflation that may ensue. Let us assume that the economy is operating below capacity and the government has embarked on fiscal expansion. We know that if the monetary sector did not react, interest rate will rise. It means that they will have to accommodate the shift in IS by shifting the LM curve downwards as shown in figure 13.3. The economy moves along the IS1 from point E to E prime, producing lower interest rate and larger output. With low interest rate, stock price increases, and with higher output, profit and hence dividends increases. In each case, stock price will increase, thus if the monetary authorities accommodate fiscal expansion, stock market will rise. Consider a scenario in which the authorities believe that fiscal expansion will surely lead to inflation. To prevent this, they can decide to counteract the fiscal expansion with monetary contraction so that the LM curve will upwards from LM0 to LM1 in figure 13.4. The figure shows that the economy was operating at point E prime, producing Y0 of output, which is lower than the full employment output YF. In order to achieve full employment, the government increased its spending and the economy settles at point E prime prime with high interest rate and large output Y1. We can now consolidate what we have learned so far. The way stock price react to changes in economic performance is unclear. Meanwhile, market expectations, demand shocks, external shocks, supply shocks, and the reaction of the central bank to such shock are factors responsible for stock price behavior. The effect of fiscal policy is unclear. It depends on the nature of the LM curve. The flatter the curve, the more responsive is output to fiscal expansion and the higher the stock price. The steeper the curve, the more responsive is interest rate and the lower the stock price. The effect of expectation is unclear. It also depends on the nature of the LM curve. The effect of monetary policy is clear. Stock price rises when the bank embarks on expansion and it falls when it embarks on contraction. Rational speculation and stock prices. We mentioned earlier that interest rate and market expectation tend to determine stock market even though the effect is unclear. However, in true life situation, stock prices do fall even as output improves. Not only that, there can be a sudden fall or rise in stock prices without any sudden fall or rise in output or interest rate. Financial economists argue that the reason for this situation is that financial market lacks obvious news or important news to justify the situation. The fundamental value of a stock price is its present in value of expected dividends, that is PTS. Because of this, stocks are sometimes overpriced or underpriced, but not exactly priced. The period of overpricing is followed by a sudden crash or a long stock market slide. What causes the mispricing? It is caused by the players in the stock market. That is, mispricing can occur when the investors are too smart or when the arbitrageurs hold on. How does this happen? Think of a stock that has not been paying dividends for a long period of time. This implies that is zero in our equation. Of course, what this means is that the value of the stock price is zero. Will you be willing to offer a price for such stock? Probably no. But assuming that you did offer a price hoping that in future the price of the stock will increase. Now consider a stock that has positive but very low price, not zero price. You might as well buy it at relatively higher price with the expectation that you will sell it at higher price in the future. If many players follow your pathway because they expect price to increase in the future, then stock price will rise today. The movement in stock price due to expectation of the players is called rational speculative bubbles. That is, the investors tend to believe rationally as the bubble inflates. The same thing extends to those who hold on to stock when it crashes. They also believe that after the crash, the bubble will continue. After the downfall, there will be uprise, so no reason for disposing stock when the price crashes because good time is behind the corner. What we have just demonstrated is that stocks can be overpriced if players expect high future returns. You can also think of other assets such as housing properties, land, etc. An area of land in a very remote area or in the valley that appear worthless will command high price today because the buyer expects to sell it at higher price in the future. Meanwhile, not all deviations from fundamental values in the financial market are rational bubble. In fact, some investors may not be completely rational. For example, that stock prices rise in the past due to good news may lead to over-optimism about the future. This over-optimism may lead to rush for the purchase of stock which is not caused by interest rate, dividends, or physical monetary shocks, but because the price rose in the past. The speculation that future price of stock will rise because it rose in the past is called fads. Now, we know that movement in stock prices are caused by two important factors. First, movement in fundamentals caused by shocks and the behavior of the rational speculative bubbles and fads. How much of the variation in stock prices can be explained by movement in fundamentals and how much by bubbles and fad is still not clear, and it is an area of research that can be exploited. This area of research is important so as to guide the investors as well as the policymakers in making the right decision. Stock market price is a good indicator for equity decision, consumers' decision, and the economy as a whole. The global financial crisis was a result of sudden but conceived crash of stock prices, and what follows was global economic recession that rocked the whole world, especially some developed countries such as the US, Canada, and the UK, and so on. In the 1990s, some Asian countries such as China, Japan, Korea were also engulfed in Asia financial crisis. Consumers need to understand the movement in stock prices so as to determine the value of their financial wealth and take decisions as to whether and when to increase or reduce it. Stock price informs firms about how much to issue shares for equity financing. Thus, having a good understanding about the behavior of share prices and factors affecting them is important. Summary: the price of bond is computed as the present value of stream of dividends discounted with current and expected short-term interest rate. There is an inverse relationship between bond price and interest rate. Yield to maturity of a long-term interest rate is, by approximation, equal to the average current and expected future interest rate. The slope of the yield curve informs us of what will happen to interest rate. If it is upward sloping, it means that expected interest rate will rise. Otherwise, it will fall. The fundamental value of a stock is the present value of expected future real dividends discounted by current and expected interest rate. If there is no mispricing caused by bubbles and fad, stock price is the fundamental value of stock. Whether changes in economic activity move with changes in stock price depends on market expectation, whether interest rate is expected to fall or rise, sources of the shocks, and CBN intervention. Rational speculations such as bubbles and fads can also cause movement in the stock prices. How? Take 2. How much variation is caused by fundamentals and how much is caused by rational speculations need to be established and therefore requires further research. Economic agents such as consumers and firms need this information so as to guide them in making appropriate decisions.